when you write a program, every program you're ever going to write, you're going to start with documentation. What should be in the documentation? A brief description of what the program does. Anything else?
Instructions on how to use it.
Perhaps instructions on how to use it would be good. Depends on the program. A lot of times instructions on how to use it are within the program itself to tell the user what to do. But instructions here wouldn't be bad also. If you're programming professionally, or you're doing it for a company, other things that would be in this documentation would be your name, that you're the one who wrote the program, and the date that you wrote the program. Or if somebody gave you a program and asked you to alter it, you would see the original person's name and the date, and then you would put a description of what changes you made, your name and the date. So the first thing that goes in every program. Every program. Number one is documentation. All right. Second, we've talked a little bit about programming efficiency. C itself was built to be efficient. So when the creators of C made it, they made it as extremely minimal as possible to make it run as fast as possible. So for example, C all by itself has absolutely no way to print stuff on the screen and absolutely no way to accept input from the keyboard. So if you want to print stuff to the screen and if you want to be able to input stuff from the keyboard, you have to tell it that. And that's what these first two commands are. This command is calling in the IO stream commands. IO is input-output. So every program you write in this course will have this line at the top. Pound symbol, you would call it hashtag, include IO stream. That needs to be in every program you write. The second line that will be in every single program you write is this one, using namespace std with a semicolon. All right, now professional programmers would tell you that's a bad idea. You should not put that line there. I'm not a professional programmer and I'm lazy. So here's the deal. Without this line, instead of being able to type cout, I would have to type std : cout every time to tell it find cout from the standard library. Why is it a bad idea to actually pull in this entire library and use it? Professional people would tell you don't do that. One, it makes it less efficient. Somebody else have an idea? Correct, it does slow it down. So it's less efficient, slows it down.
Could it overlap variables that we're trying to use?
It could overlap other stuff. That's right. I don't know everything that's in that standard directory. But it's possible that I might want to use something that's already called in that directory, and then I have a conflict and my program isn't going to run right. That especially becomes true when you get very advanced and you start writing your own libraries. Why do we do it in this class? Because we're not going to write our own libraries. Our programs are not going to be that complicated. We're never going to have those issues happen, and we don't want to write std : cout and std : cin every time. We're a little bit lazy. Okay, so there's number two. The second thing that will go in every single program that you ever write will be include IO stream. And make sure you spell it correctly. That was an issue that we had with some people on Tuesday. They spelled IO stream wrong. It's input, output, stream. That helps you to remember it. And then you're going to have using namespace std semicolon. All right, so that's the second thing that will be in every single program that you will ever write. The third thing that's going to show up, and you see it here in this program, is you're going to have void main, a set of empty parentheses like that, And then the fourth thing you need is you need a curly bracket to start your program and a curly bracket to end your program. Those are the four things that you will need to put in every single program that you write in this course. Questions about that? That's question number 1 on your quiz on Tuesday. What are the 4 things that you need to put in every single program that you write? And I do expect you to write out hashtag include IOStream. I expect those words written specifically using namespace STD. So there's question number 1 on your quiz tomorrow on Tuesday. So everybody in the room should get it right. I'm telling you right now. Go home, memorize it. You need to know it. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. All right. So questions about that?
Will you ever be using anything other than main, like loops and such?
We will get to the point where we start using loops. Yes. Eventually, we will talk about while loops and do while loops and for loops. If you're talking about loop specifically, the coding loop is a Arduino thing. It's not a standard C++ thing. Yes?
What does the void main do again?
Void main. All right, that's a very good question. And it's difficult to answer right now. In C, there are things called functions. Main is a predefined function. A function in C is very similar to a function in math. What do functions in math do?
Represent lines or curves.
Yeah, sort of.
Doesn't it find corresponding values?
It is an equation, and it finds corresponding values. So in a math class, I might write f of x equals x squared minus 5x. And then I might ask you, find f at 4. And what does that mean? It means plug in 4 for the x's and see what the answers are. Answer is, in this case, we only get one answer, right? So we would plug it in, we would get 16 minus 20, we would get negative 4. That's what a function is in math. C programming also has functions. So they work kind of similarly. Sometimes you give them inputs, and sometimes they give you outputs. Main is one of those functions. Main is a weird function in the sense that it does not have any inputs. And because I called it void, in math terms, it doesn't have any outputs. Okay? If you read your textbook, which I hope you will at some point, in your textbook, you're going to see that they use int main, and then they have the curly brackets, and way down at the bottom, right before the last curly bracket, they have a line that says return 0. So what this means is my function name is main. It has no inputs, but when I get all done, it's going to have an output. It's going to have an integer output. So that's kind of weird. That doesn't happen in a math class. In a math class, a function has to have an input and an output. In C programming, we can have a function with no input, yet it gives us an answer when we get all done. And so the code for telling the computer what the answer is return. So we have to return. People always use 0. The truth is you could put any integer number there. It wouldn't matter.
Why do you do that as opposed to just having void?
I have no idea, truthfully. But that does seem to be a more standard convention to use int main than to use void main. I don't know why. I like void, so I'm going to use void. If you want to use int, you can use int. I don't care. I mean, you could use float. You could use double. You could use character. All sorts of things you could put there. Your main function doesn't really return a value to anywhere, so why have it return something? I don't know. So if you read your book and you see this, when you see int main, in your mind, just cross out int and put void. And then ignore this return 0 at the bottom.
Let's say this program we wrote yesterday, let's say we just backspace void main. What would happen?
It would not compile without the void main being there.
You couldn't
No, it wouldn't. If you try to debug it, it would crash on compile and it would tell you things are missing.
So, int main, void main is just saying, it's just shorthand for there's a space here?
Void main is saying this is where the main body of my program begins. Like I say, the word void,
Yes.
I prefer the word void. Your textbook prefers the word int.
So that's a much longer way of saying that.
Yep.
I mean, return 0 means that the main body of the product is ended.
Yes, it means my function main has ended, and I'm going to send back the number 0. But the number 0 doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. So why use int and then return a 0 when that doesn't do anything? It's confusing to me. So again, if you're reading your book, or if you download the 2017 Visual Studio Community and put that on your laptop, by default it uses int main and return 0. But you can change it to void main and take out the return 0 and it'll still work. But by default it actually types that in for you for some reason. I don't know why. Saving you some money. All right, so every single program in the whole wide world that you're going to write in this class will contain these 4 things. Okay. All right, now, general structuring of a program. Notice I started with my documentation. I called in the header files that I needed. That's this point, called in the files that I needed. I've got my void name. Generally, what comes next is, you can do it either way. You can put directions for the user next, or you can define your variables next. So in this case, I chose to give directions to the user, and then I define my variables. So this is something that most of you learned as you were doing this program. What does this command cout do?
Something
Output something where?
on the screen.
On screen. So cout is the command to print something on the screen. And cout is kind of interesting because you notice down here I have cout. I can put text. If I wanted to put text, I simply put it in a set of quotations. If I wanted to print variables, I just type the variable name. And every block needs to be separated by 2 less than symbols. So I can type the sum of, and it'll print those words. Then it'll print the value for that number. Then it'll print the word and. It'll print the value for num2. Then it'll print the word is. And then finally it will print the sum, which was defined up here. So in one cout line, you can print many different things. Catherine?
How come sometimes there's more than symbols used, like cin?
All right, so cin is a different command. Cout always uses less than symbols. Cin always uses greater than symbols. And after a while, you'll get to the point where you've memorized that. Before that, you'll make mistakes, and you'll put the wrong symbols on the wrong ones, and then it won't compile. And you'll see squiggly red lines on your code, and you'll realize I did it wrong. Okay? What does cin do? It gets input from the keyboard. So what happened here, the computer saw cout enter the first number. So it printed that on the screen. Cout is a print command. Cin, this told the computer, pause. The human is going to type something in. When the human types something in and hits enter, store it into number 1 and then move on. Okay? So we always use cout to print, cin to get input from the user.
What if the user doesn't input an integer?
What if the user does not input an integer? That's a great question. What do you think would happen? So let's say it got to this point and I didn't know I was supposed to use integers because it didn't tell me that in the direction. It said 2 numbers. And so I wanted to type in 15.92. And the computer saw that. What would it do? It would read it as 15. What would it do with the decimal point? Nope. Nope. Okay, so what would happen? If I type this in at this line right here, num1 would be stored as value 15. Num1 would be 15. What the computer would do is it would save that decimal point thinking the person's going to want to input something else later. So it would actually keep that and save it. And then we would have a bad problem. Because when it got to this point, C in num2, it would try to input this decimal point. Decimal point is a character, but I'm trying to C in a number. So what would the computer do when it tried to run this line right here? It would crash. Because it would give you an error saying, you're telling me to input a number, but I'm trying to input a character. Decimal point is a character.
So that happened if you put in main character? Like, say if I wanted to, like, spell out 15 in words, it would be the same thing.
If you tried to spell out 15 in words, it would crash right here, because it would say, I'm supposed to read a number, you gave me a letter. And it would give you a runtime error, and it would break the program and stop.
Yeah, my mom's told me about debugging. My mom has told me about debugging some forms. Like she's debugged some forms, and sometimes people put letters in for dates or December, and part of coding is learning how to not only fix these errors, but put in the error message that will correct things and tell the person what they did.
Correct. So, part of what can fix that is very, very good directions to tell people how to input the things. Okay? And that's something you'll learn. And it's hard when you're the person writing the program and then you're the person running the program, because you know what you're supposed to type in, so you type it in right. And you don't think of what would happen if somebody types it in wrong. But that's what would happen. If you tried to type in a decimal in this program, it would crash it right there. All right. So, general flow again. We have documentation on top. We call in our headers. We either begin with directions or declare variables. So if I were to document this line right here, I would call it declare variables. That's what that line is doing. It's saving the memory spots for people, for the computer. Again, this cout, this is print directions. Where this cin is get data from user. Get input from user. So on and so forth. All right, now so we started our documentation, called our headers, did our void main, we gave directions, we created our variables, and then after that will be your main coding. And then down at the end, you'll have this curly bracket, and that's where your program stops. All right, this line right here, these two lines, what do those two lines do?
Calculate and store the sum and difference variable.
Correct. It really does two things. It calculates the sum and it stores it. Oh, you're good?
That's easy.
Okay. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that creates a variable that calculates the sum and stores it.
It doesn't actually create the variable. The variable sum was actually created back up here. So sum was created back up here. What this does is it takes num1 and num2, adds them together, and stores it into sum. So this does two things. Adds num1, num2, and stores into sum. All right, my personal opinion. This is bad programming. What am I doing with this sum? What's the only thing I do with it later on? I display it, don't I? And some people notice this later on in this cout here where I had you find the product. Some people notice that there's no variable called product. You calculated it right here within your within your C outline. So C out can do that too. Not only can C out print things, you can also do calculations within a C out.
I get that.
Yeah, it's floating around somewhere. Anybody got it? Where are the extra copies? They're way up in the back there. Okay, so again, this is my personal opinion. Creating this variable called sum and writing sum equals num1 plus num2 for the only purpose of printing it is a bad idea. What have I done? I've created an extra variable which takes memory and takes time. I've done this line which takes time. And all I'm doing in the end is printing it. So you should try to avoid using variables unless you really need them. If all you're going to do is print something, it's really not a great idea to call it a variable. Unless perhaps it has a formula that is pretty complicated. Then it's probably worth creating a variable and writing the formula separately, and then later on just saying, well, print that variable for me. But in my opinion, this really isn't a very good idea. I really shouldn't have done these two lines. I should have just put num1 plus num2 right here. But I did it this way on purpose so that I could describe to you this point, that this isn't a great idea. And when you use a cout, you can use it in two different ways.
So why is, for the product, num1 times num2 all together, and then up there you have num1 space plus space num2? Would you have to write that way if you plugged it into the sum and difference, or?
Spaces are optional. When the program compiles, C doesn't read spaces. It just skips them. So sometimes we put spacing in just to space it out to make it a little bit easier to read. Spaces are completely optional. I could have put num1 space star space num2, and it would have worked just as well. Other questions? Okay. I could have changed this program slightly. I could have done this. I could have said cout, enter two numbers. Oh, I don't think I asked this, but most of you figured it out. What does ENDL do? End line, it makes a carriage return, skips it to the next line when it prints. If you don't put an end line, what's going to happen? It's going to string it together. Even if you have a cout and then another cout, without this end line, it's just going to string them together.
If you want to skip like two spaces, you can do endl, endl.
Correct. If you want to put a blank line in, you can put endl and then another endl. Again, you got to connect. You got to put the less than symbols in between. All right, so now I'm telling the person enter two numbers at the same time. My cin statement would then look like this: cin num1 num2. So just like with a cout can print multiple different things at the same time. Cin can read in multiple variables at the same time. Here's the danger with this, though. If I'm reading this and I see enter two numbers, I'm very likely to type in 5, 3. What's going to happen? No, it's worse. It will crash. It will read num1. Num1 will be the number 5. It will try to read num2, but what's it see? A comma, and it says, that's not a number, I can't do it, I'm done. And it quits on you. So again, you need to tell the person very clear directions. So what should you say instead of just enter two numbers? One thing that would work would be to leave a space in between. So you could say enter two numbers, put a space between them. Ignore spaces. So if I typed in 5, 3, and then hit enter, that would work. It would say num1 is 5, num2 is 3. That would work just fine.
What would happen if you put in a double-digit number? Would that not work?
No, that would be fine. If I put in 26 and then a space in 52, That would be fine. It would say 26 is number 1, 52 is number 2. That would work just fine.
Use spaces. I found possible.
That's fine. Again, C ignores spaces. So you could put in 152 spaces, and it would still work.
Do those spaces make the program run slower or?
No. Well, slightly slower because the buffer's got to skip them, but not significantly. So you won't notice the difference.
Okay.
The other option would be to type in the number 26, hit enter, and then type in the number 52 and hit enter. And then it would take 26 and store it into num1. It would take 52 and store it into num2.
Is there any way to skip a comma?
Is there any way to skip a comma? That's a great question. I was hoping somebody would ask that. The answer is
No.
yes. In fact, there are several ways. All right, so let's talk about that. So I'm going to have int num1, comma num2. I'm going to make a character variable, ch, and I'm going to call it hold. I could give it any name in the whole world. Hold. I'm calling it hold because I'm going to use it to hold the comma. Okay? Then I would give directions. I would say cout, enter 2 numbers, separated. I don't know if I can spell separated. By a comma. As long as it's in quotes, C doesn't care if I spell it right or wrong because it's just going to print that to the screen anyway, so if I spelled separated wrong, I spelled it wrong. It's okay. Now in my cin statement, what I'm going to have is I'm going to tell it cin. What comes first? Num1. Then what? Hold, and that hold will read the comma. And then num2. So if you want somebody to input 2 numbers and separate them by a comma, there's how you do it. You just make a variable that really doesn't do anything other than read the comma, and then you never use the comma, but it just reads it, lets the person type it in.
So really those numbers could be separated by any character?
So really those numbers could be separated by any character and the program would not know. It would still run.
I want to get back to these spaces, but you said the spaces don't matter, but when you do separate 2 numbers with a space, it does matter?
What do you mean separate numbers by a space?
When we're inputting it,
Yes, on input it does matter.
it doesn't.
So when it says input 2 numbers, so you could type in 1 number, put a space, and then type the second number, and the space is what tells the computer, here's the first number, here's the second number. Or like I say, you could type in the first number, push the enter button, and then the second number and push the enter button. And that would work also. When you're writing your code, spaces don't matter, except you cannot have a space in a variable name. So I can't have num space 1, that won't work. That should be a solid block there. Questions on that? Other questions? All right, so today we're going to write a program. Yeah, we are. Turn this back on. All right, so I'm not going to make you look at that, but I'm going to leave it that way so I can record. We'll make it look prettier for you. There we go. So what's the first thing I put in my program?
Documentation.
Documentation. So this program will input 2 points and find the distance between them. So that's what that program's going to do. What comes next? Include IOStream. Using namespace. Go ahead.
Should I put this, should I try to type this out on a Word document, or should I try to write it down?
You can do either. When I'm all done, I'm going to save this and I'm going to post it on Blackboard.
Okay.
So if you don't want to write it down, if you just want to watch and pay attention, that'll work too, because I will save it for you and post it on Blackboard and you can go look at it later.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Save the program file with the, copy that to the Word document.
I'll copy it into a Word document. And that way it's easier for you to open it. All right, do you remember a little while ago I told you that C was built to be very, very minimal all in itself? As far as math goes, the only thing C knows how to do by default is add, subtract, multiply, divide, and find absolute value of integers. It doesn't even know how to find absolute values of decimals. Anybody remember the distance formula? That's the slope formula.
Square root
Square root.
y2 minus, no, y2, yeah, y2 minus y1 squared plus x2 minus x1 squared.
So what you told me is I need square roots and I need exponents. C doesn't know how to do that. So I'm going to tell it how to do that. So quite often, not only are you going to need to include IOStream, you're also going to need to include C math is correct. Now you won't always need that, but if you want to do anything with exponents or trig functions or exponentials or square roots or anything like that, then you need to call in that C math. It calls in all those normal math functions that you're used to dealing with. All right. If this program had any constants that I was going to use, typically constants would go right here. Do we have any constants in this program? For finding the distance, do we need a constant? No, I don't think so. So we don't have any constants. But they would typically go right there, right before the void main. What comes next? Void main. All right. So void. Make sure it's a little v. Some people the other day were using a big V. That doesn't work. Main, parentheses, and then a beginning curly bracket and an ending curly bracket. And I'm just going to put in a bunch of spaces because that's where I'm going to type stuff. Okay, what am I going to need for variables? Let's figure out what we need for variables.
First X coordinate, first Y coordinate, second.
X and second Y.
Yeah.
All right, so now let me ask you a question. If I told you give me a point, what would you tell me? Would you just say 2, 3, or would you put a parenthesis, and then a 2, and then a comma, and then a 3, and then a parenthesis? Depends on how I ask. That's correct. So this comes down to very good directions again.
Please enter the first number in the ordered pair.
All right, so there's two ways you can do this. You can say, please enter the first X value. Please enter the second Y value. I better do first Y value first, I
I know
suppose.
it's confusing.
And that's confusing, correct. So what I would prefer to do is I would prefer to have the person actually type it like a point. Have a parenthesis, a number, a comma, a number, and a parenthesis. How am I going to get that parenthesis read and that comma and that parenthesis? I'm going to use a character hold. And all it's going to do is cut out the parentheses for me. So our first variable I'm going to need is ch hold. Oh, that's not ch, I'm sorry, it's char, character. Hold. I think I wrote ch before. I did. Bad teacher. Char. Variable to hold characters. And then, I think you're absolutely right, I need the x1, the x2, the y1, the y2. What kind of variables are those?
Integer.
Integers? Could they be decimals? Yes? So what kind of variables should I call them? I think I'm going to use float, because the person could use decimals. That's possible. That'd be all right. So float, x value 1, y value 1, x value 2, y value 2. Coordinates, 4 points. Again, notice I did not call them x1, x2, y1, y2. We very rarely use one-letter variables. Give it something that's a little more descriptive. X value 1, x value 2. The distance formula. The distance formula is a little bit complicated, isn't it? So instead of just putting that in a print line, that formula is a little bit complicated. I think I will actually create a variable called distance and compute it. I think it'll be a little better. So I'm going to have what kind of variable is that? Float, because it's going to be a decimal when we get all done, because it's got a square root in it. All right, so float, distance. The distance. Really don't need to document that. That one's pretty obvious. All right, so I think that's all the variables I'm going to need. What do I do now?
At some point, you're going to need to write in the actual equation, but I'm guessing you're first going to want to set up a place where the user can input the values.
Very good. Before I can write the actual equation in terms of steps, I need the person to give me the values first. Once I get the values, then I can tell the program to figure out the distance. So they have to come in that order. I've got to get the values first, then I can do the calculations. So what do I have to do to get the values? See out what?
Enter first.
Well, I'm not.
However you want.
However I want it. Correct. All right. So see out. Tell user about program. So I'm just going to save myself some time here. I'm going to be a little bit lazy. So this is where I would say this program is going to input 2 points. It will tell you the distance. I don't want to type all that, although I probably could have typed it as fast as I just said it. But so you would tell the user about the program. Now I'm going to get my data. So I'm going to tell the user what to do. Cout, enter the first point in the form, and I'm going to very specifically tell this person, I want the parentheses, I want the comma. I expect you to type those things in.
Now, if they have a space between the comma and the y,
That'll be okay.
okay.
Space is not read as a character. It's skipped. That'll still work. Yes?
What if you end up putting character hold and they don't end up putting like a comma in the chord?
Then it's not going to work right. It's going to mess something up along the way. And we'll see what it would mess up. All right, so I've told the person to type in the first point. Now what do I need to do? I got to get, did I want to what?
An end line.
Did I want an end line? I don't know. Do you want an end line?
I think
It would be nice? Okay. Depends on your preference. Sometimes it's nice to put an end line. Sometimes it's nice maybe to put like a colon in a space here, and then it'll print the colon in the space, and then the person will type their point right next to it. Again, that comes down to personal preference. Some people like to put an end line and have the input on the next line. I like to have it on the same line. All right, so I need to tell the person to enter it. So what command is that? CN. Double greater than. What do I need to see in? The first thing they're going to put is the parenthesis, isn't it? So what's that parenthesis? That's hold. We just basically grabbing that parenthesis, holding it, doing nothing with it. Hold. What are they going to type next? X val 1. X val 1.
Hold again.
Then hold again. just to read the comma. We're not doing anything with it. We're just going to read it and kick it out of the way. Hold again. Then what?
Y
Y val
val 1.
1. And then hold one more time to read that closing parenthesis. So again, this will read parenthesis, the first number, the comma, the second number, the parenthesis, semicolon. Don't forget your semicolons. That's right. And again, they on the keyboard they could make a mistake. Instead of putting a comma here, they could put a colon, and it's still going to work. They can type any character. They could type F for all I care, and it would still work actually.
How does that negate, how does that make it not get messed up when there's a lack of a comma?
It will get messed up if there's a lack of a
I
comma.
mean, if there's
There
a
has to be
comma.
some character there's like a placeholder.
What would happen if there was a lack of a comma? It would actually read the Y value, what's supposed to be that number. It would read it as a character. Character variable can also be numbers. So hold would become the Y value that you want, and then it would try to read Y value, but the next thing that would see would be a parenthesis, and it would crash because it would say Y value is supposed to be a number. I'm trying to read a parenthesis.
What I meant to ask is how does that make it so you can put a comma in?
Because this hold right here is going to read the parenthesis.
So it's parenthesis,
This reads the X value.
so it's parenthesis X parenthesis Y.
Right. This hold right here in the middle, that's where it reads the comma.
Oh, that's parenthesis X comma Y.
Parenthesis. Correct.
Oh, so you can put what you need to in there, like F or some squiggle, if you were able to type some squiggle, and it would read that as, okay, just keep it in that format.
Yep.
Huh.
All right. So now we've read the first number. What do we need to do next?
End line
End line where?
after the hold on the,
Right here?
yeah.
All right. I'm going to put that in, and then I'm going to yell at you. No, no, no. Yeah, that's as much as I'll yell. What's wrong with that? What does CIN do? CIN is only inputs. What's ENDL?
Ending out.
That's for outputs, isn't it?
Does it like that?
What will happen when you type this in and hit enter? It will automatically go to a new line. So after it does this CIN on the screen and you type enter, it will go to a new line for you. You don't need to tell it to go to a new line. Okay? But don't mix those commands. I've seen people try to do this with a CIN. They'll try to put quotes here and say something. Oops. Something. I can't even type it right. It makes me so angry. On a CIN command, can I put something with quotes? No, that's for printing. CIN does not print. CIN takes stuff in. Okay? So make sure you keep those separate in your mind. CIN does one thing, COUT does something completely different. All right, so we've read the first point. Now what?
Second point.
Read the second point. And that looks almost exactly the same, doesn't it? All right, so I'm going to put some documentation here. Directions to user and read first point. So I don't need to document every single solitary line. I made you do that the other day just so you tried to figure out what every single line did. But you can document in blocks like that. Those 2 lines I can document as one. All right, well, I'm going to do this the easy way here. I now need to read the second point, but that's really the same stuff pretty much. So I tried to copy, and now it's mad at me. And now I'll paste. So all I got to do now is say enter the second point in the form da-da-da. And now I don't want x value 1, I want x value 2 and y value 2. And change that to second. So you can copy and paste on this when you have lines that are very, very similar, and that's a good idea. All right, so we read in the first point. We read in the second point. Now what do we have to do? Calculate the actual distance, correct? That's what we want in the end. So now I got to use that distance formula. All right, so distance is. And again, I put spaces there. Space equals space. Those spaces are optional. It's not going to affect the program one way or the other. In other languages, spaces do matter, so watch out for that. Fortran is a very, very old language, and everything had to be in the right space or it didn't work. And that was annoying. You had something off by one space and it crashed. That used to make me very angry. C is friendly with spaces. All right, so how do I find the distance again? Square root. Okay, so square root is an exponent, isn't it? So the command for exponents in C is POW, which stands for? Power. So then I put a parenthesis. I put the first thing, and then I put a comma, and then I put the power that I want. So I'm going to skip the first thing for a minute. I'll come back to it. I'm going to put the comma. If I'm doing a square root, what power do I want? 1/2 or 0.5? Which one? 1/2. Ah, you didn't let me make the mistake. Very good. What's wrong with what I just typed? 1/2.
It doesn't know that that's division. It doesn't know that that slash means division.
Oh, it does mean that it's division. Well, what's 1 divided by 2 in computer language? It's 0, because those are both integers. 1 divided by 2 is 0 in computer world. I need to tell it, I really want you to give me decimals. So if I'm going to use 1/2, 1 point divided by 2, and now that's the number 1/2 or 0.5. One of the simple, most common mistakes you will make at some point in your life is you will type in 1 divided by 2, and the computer says, okay, that's 0. No problem.
So we put a decimal after the 1 that recognizes it as something different.
When you put a decimal after the 1, it now recognizes that 1 is a float variable, a float number. So 1 as a float number divided by an integer, it will give you a float answer. I could have put the decimal after the 2. I need the decimal on one or the other. It doesn't matter which one. I could do it on both if I really wanted to, but I don't need to. Okay, so there's our square root. What goes underneath the square root? x2 minus x1 squared. All right, so I have an option. I could put another power thing, which gets confusing. I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to do x val 2 minus x val 1 times x val 2 minus x val, can't spell val today, 1. I forgot a set of parentheses. So instead of having a power and then having another power thing inside, that can get confusing and hard to read. I think I'm just going to do x2 minus x1 times x2 minus x1, which is x2 minus x1 squared, correct? And then I'm going to do the exact same things with the y's. So then I need plus, and again, it's very similar, so I'm going to use my copy-paste option. Would it be wrong to use? No, that's a matter of your preference and what's harder to read. Oh, this is scrolled off the screen and I can't see it. What do I do about that?
Just scroll, click the bar and scroll over.
You can just hit enter.
I have 3 options. 1 is I can, of course, use the scroll bar and come over. 2, I could close up this thing because I don't need it anymore and I could expand this window. Or 3, I could actually right here or anywhere hit an enter. C still reads this as all one complete line because I have not put a semicolon. So you can have one line of code could be multiple lines long. C doesn't think your code is done until you put a semicolon. So if your code gets too wide, put an enter and have it drop down to the next line. It doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. I do need that semicolon at the end. There it is. And you might have noticed, I don't know if you saw that happening real quickly, when I hit that semicolon, it added spaces right there between that minus and between that minus. I didn't add those spaces, it did it in for me. It thinks it did that to help me to make it easier to read. Did it make it easier to read? I don't know. All right, we're just about out of time. In fact, I might be, no, I'm right on time. So, last thing we would have, see out. The distance is distance. Notice after the word is, I put a space. Why did I put a space after the word is? So when it prints, it will actually print a space. Otherwise, is and the answer are going to be squished right next to each other. If you want spaces, you need to tell it, hey, I want spaces. What if I typed this? What would this do? What if I put a semicolon right there, and then I put C out, oops, distance here. When the program runs, what's it going to print? It's going to print it as one line. It will write the distance is, and then it will put the number. How come it didn't go to a new line when I put a new line here? I didn't tell it to put a new line. I did not put the command end line. Without the command end line, it keeps printing across and across and across until it gets to 80 characters. It can hold 80 characters across. Once it gets to 80 characters, then it'll go to the new line and keep printing. But you might split a word in the middle, whatever. You have no idea. All right. Do we have everything we need?
You need to enable that the distance or no? Is that holding the around variables?
Say that again.
So like up top, you never mind.
Okay. End main. I do have an end main. It's right there. I've got some extra spaces in there that I don't need. Take those out. Let's run it, see if it works. Debug. Start without debugging. Hoping I didn't make a mistake, because that's embarrassing when you do that in front of a group of 40 people. So far, so good. All right, somebody give me a point. 2, 3. Enter. Somebody give me another point.
4.26.
Let's make it one where we know the distance.
How about 2, 5?
How about 2, 5? What's the distance between 2, 3 and 2, 5? 2. So let's try something that we know to see if it gives us the right answer. Otherwise, it's going to give us a number. We don't know if it's right or not. You don't care if you got the right number?
It gave us a number.
It gave us a number. Woohoo, we're happy. Teacher's not so happy because it's the wrong number. The distance is 2. It gave us the right answer. Now, this was a suggestion that some people made for an improvement. Notice it says the distance is 2, and then it says press any key to continue. So what would be a way to improve this program? On this last C out statement, put an end line. Maybe 2, just to push it down to the bottom. So that's typically what you're going to do with your very last C out statement, is you will put an end line on it, just to dump that, press any key down to the next line.
How does it know to put press any key to continue?
It always says press any key to continue. Always. Questions, comments, concerns?
Do it again. Run it again.